Hello everyone, welcome back to OCD Recovery's YouTube channel. Eric and I have not done a video in a long time, and my 2-year anniversary recovery video will be coming up in about a week or so, and we kind of wanted to go through how things have been. I'm going to ask Erica a few questions to show you guys maybe what she's learned on the recovery journey. If you hear anything in the background, that's our dogs. This is what happens when you have 2 dogs. They like to sit near you in the videos, which are great. A lot of people know the dogs in the video. So the first thing I'm going to talk about basically where I am now and where we kind of are. So 2 years ago in what? How many days from now? In like a week.
Yeah.
2 years in a week, I put my video games away, and that's when I really start to make a lot of serious headway on my sensory motor recovery. I'd say it took me probably about, in your opinion, how long do you think, from your perspective, that I've been recovered from sensory motor for?
I don't know that there isn't a date. So
6 to 8 months, maybe.
Probably longer than that.
Probably longer. Maybe. I would say it linger, but I would say like
Closer to a year.
You probably have never heard me talk about it, like, in that regard at all. And that's how you really know. And don't get me wrong, people do suppress things with OCD and anxiety, especially with stuff like POCD and harm OCD, where there's a lot of societal rejection going on. But overall, I would say I've been in a much better spot from sensory motor there is no sensory motor anymore because there's no fear cycle. Even if it came back today full force, it has tried to latch a few times over the last year or so, usually in stressful situations with our job or like when things are going crazy. You know how that's what we talk about. That's why it's so important to cover. That's when OCD really will tend to kind of turn the heat back up. When
even then you bounce back from it a lot faster.
Yeah, I don't even think I haven't had any moment where I needed to even bounce back from that.
Not recently.
No, after I recovered from sensory motor, I really developed GAD pretty bad and then panic disorder for a little bit. Those symptoms aren't gone fully, but 95% of the time I'm basically in the clear. But sensory motor completely recovered from. But yeah, so that was that. I would say the first year was pretty shitty, right? Like yeah. The first 5 months of 2020, before I even put the video games away, was really a tough place for me because I wasn't listening to Erica.
The first year was hard, but there was more hope than I had seen in any of the preceding months at all.
Preceding basically
because
year.
You were actually engaging with life, and you weren't doing that.
Yeah, because I developed tinnitus fears in June of 2019. So I went a whole entire year of really not even knowing what was actually going on fully, especially when sensory motor latched with blinking and then saliva and salivation. So that was really a very interesting place for me. But I wanted to start the video, besides the background, asking you, in your opinion, what have you noticed the most, in say the last, probably the last year? From 1 year to 2 years.
Noticing you.
Let's put it this way. What did you notice from 0 to 1 year and then 1 to 2 years? First year versus second year.
0 to 1 year, there was a lot of progress. I would say that the difference between 0 to 1 year is bigger than 1 year to 2 year.
Never thought about it like that.
Just because I felt like your learning curve was a lot steeper.
Mm-hmm.
And then so from 1 year to 2 years, it's more of just like continuing to practice all of the things that you were learning from 0 to 1.
Yeah, because like I was talking about earlier today, when it comes to Stoicism and rational emotive behavioral therapy and unconditional acceptance, it's really proclaimed at times as this very easy thing, which I'm actually going to make a few TikToks after this because it is important to cover this. But Stoicism and unconditional acceptance is actually not easy for anyone. And someone I was talking with made a really good point and said it's probably actually harder for someone, and this isn't to say anything mean about Erica, but Erica could understand what this means. It's probably harder for someone like Erica or a non-sufferer to apply it long term because we need the drive for us, because we're chronically suffering so bad. That's not a diss to a non-sufferer versus sufferer. It's just a theory that we were talking about, and there's no real validity to it, but it does make sense. I mean, one of the main reasons...
If you're not forced to confront that, then you're not...
It's more difficult.
It takes more personal effort.
Yeah, like we have really no choice. Well, we have a choice. We could stay suffering, but I mean, you more than likely want to put the effort in. But for yourself, what would you say are the things you notice the most about yourself that you've learned in these past 2 years?
Taking the things that you've learned and applying it to myself. So especially with irrational beliefs and stuff, things should be this way, shouldn't be that way. And I still struggle with certain things. I mean,
what would you say?
We were talking about money the other day.
Well, yeah, this is actually really good. What do you think you struggle with the most, like applying it for?
Some of my deeper fears, again, with regards to money, is one of them. But it's easier for me, even though I still have the irrational belief. It's easier for me to see that it's irrational and therefore not do something like take out my fear on Nick, or anybody else for that matter. So stuff like that.
Confrontation.
Confrontation, I would say, is probably the biggest one that I.
And we handle that in two separate ways, right? Because my irrational, I don't mind confrontation at all, but one of the irrational beliefs that has been more difficult for me to work on than sensory motor in its own way, lengthwise, is the ability to see people for who they are. Agreement versus acceptance is probably the hardest. Agreement doesn't mean acceptance is probably the hardest thing for most people to practice, especially more people like me that I would say don't mind confrontation, is that when I'm having a conversation with someone, especially with OCD, whether they're working with OCD or not, it's easy for me still to be at times, this person's such an idiot, when they're not an idiot. They just don't understand OCD. I've gotten, light years better. I don't know. What do you think in your opinion?
You, even before the OCD latched, had a lot of irrational beliefs like, oh, this person is so stupid. Road rage was pretty bad. He's gotten out of the car a few times and screamed at people.
Yeah.
He doesn't do that anymore, at least not that I am aware of.
No, I don't do that anymore. No, those are gone.
So that behavior has reared its head in different aspects, whether it's OCD or road rage or whatever it is. But again, you can take a lot of these principles and apply it to other areas of life. And when people ask, because I remember thinking when Nick first started suffering, like, where did my husband go? This is not the man that I married. And I've had people ask me, do you feel like you have your husband back now? And my answer is still no. But it's for a good reason. I feel like I have a better version of the man that I did marry, because the man that I did marry was the person who would yell at people in the car.
And spend a lot of time getting angry, like.
Yeah, and he would kind of go down a spiral of, if something negative happened, then he would, I called it scanning. He would start scanning for other negative things to focus on, and it would take a lot of effort for him to pull himself out of that.
Like even last night, remember when you were like, what are you watching? I was watching a debate, a political debate from Texas, and as many people who may know, Texas can be very conservative in their own way, and it was a great debate. And I used to not be able to watch things like that in my own way because I thought that, anytime I would watch,
if you didn't agree with something, then they were immediately stupid.
I think the biggest difference in my belief system that you probably know this, you probably don't remember this, was our continuing education. Remember that? You remember she said that she was worried because the guy that was on stage was saying a bunch of stuff about depression from a neurological standpoint that was
not necessarily true.
Very
simplified.
Very irrational. And I listened the whole time with open ears, right? That probably was the most attentive in that room of 400 people. Right. I was like, that looks so creepy right there. It's just light. But that's how I was like.
But I have been in enough situations, and this is where I have to kind of unlearn this, is I've been in enough situations with Nick where something like that will happen, and I start to get worried that he's going to go off the rails and get mad, or say something a little too loud where somebody else might hear it and then cause, again, not great with conflict, cause conflict. And then it would just be a very, very uncomfortable situation.
It's still for me like 98% of the time it's a nothing for me. But like I was hiking the staircase that everyone sees me hike, was it 2 weeks ago? And my headphones were dead, so I had my music playing out of my thing, and there was a bunch of people that were like, why are you playing your music? And I just, like a quick reaction, I just said, why do you care? Which I usually wouldn't say that. I just would kind of keep walking or be like, because I like music. But I didn't say anything after that. But at times, I mean, we are fallible human beings. And because of the world we live in, where we have a deep belief that anger and resentment and showing people that they're wrong is the number one form of debating, it's not true at all. The calm person always has the upper hand. Always. In a lot of the situations we're talking about, we're not talking about extreme outlying situations like war and, tyrannical governments and extreme oppression. We're talking about the average day things where people, when they have a fist fight in the coffee shop because the barista gave them the wrong size. Like, or the bank the other day when the person was screaming at the teller next to me. I had to text Erica and be like, oh, this is interesting. But yeah, I would say that's probably the number one thing. Now, I want to talk about something, and I'm going to let Erica answer as well, and then I want to see kind of how our answers compare. By the way, so there's a difference between Erica and I when it comes to videos. She knows
anything in life.
She knows I can just turn the video on and talk. I've had people I've talked about this with them, and they've said to me, how long are you skidding? Like, how long are you going over your stuff? And I said, 50% of the time I turn the camera on. I've been very gifted with that, and I don't use a lot of fillers, and I could speak pretty clearly. I might speak 8 bajillion miles an hour, but that actually probably has gotten a little bit better since I've become a little bit more rational. I can kind of tone things down. I would say the number one thing I've learned from 2 years into recovery so far is the benefits for our relationship. I was really black and white and very much on the lines of, this is what we were going to do, right? I wouldn't say, hey, what do you think about this? I would say, this is what we're going to do, which I still kind of do at times, but I would say it's better.
You're also better at receiving my feedback of, please don't tell me what to do.
Yeah. No, seriously. But this is the reality of relationships. So I think this is really good if you're suffering with ROCD, because we tend to think, with all this nonsensical YouTube stuff about, 12 steps you're in love. And I was in the urinal the other day, and there was an ad in front of the urinal that I just started laughing to myself. This was yesterday after we did the stairs. And it was called something like The Perfect Matchmaker, how I've gotten 700 people to be perfectly in love. And it's just a very irrational belief that doesn't do us well in the long term of relationships, because relationships are compromise, ups and downs. I can't always put my music on level 3 million in the car because she doesn't like that. We can't have super fatty Italian food every single night. She doesn't like it.
We can't go out to eat every single night.
I love going out to eat. That's like one of my favorite experiences. I love it. She knows. We always joke. I'll say something like, in our retirement plan, would I want us to be able to go out to eat every single day from retirement until I die?
That's literally all he wants.
I love that,
You could live in a box.
And energy drinks. She came home the other day. She said, hey, look, I really want to do this thing for the blog she does. And it was X amount of money. And I said, okay, we could do that. Can I buy an energy drink every day for 30 days? Like, that's my bargain. Like, I'm such a simple person when it comes to these moronic, little...
If you do this, then I get to do something too.
Yeah, it's so stupid. But this is what relationships are like. We don't... I would say that the thing that was stopping me the most from having a successful marriage was the amount of yelling I was doing. Modeled after basically the behavioral I saw in my family. We were just yellers. Even when we weren't yelling in a malicious way, we were like yelling. We would just be like, you idiot.
Or like yelling in my direction. Like I can tell when he's yelling at me, which is rare, but versus yelling in my direction, and I have to be like, I am not the problem.
Yeah, I did this.
We had somebody with our own business call and start giving Nick attitude about me. And so he called me being like, who the F is this woman? Why is she giving me attitude about you? And I know that he's not yelling at me. He's yelling towards me about this woman
in
and
the
her
space
behavior,
of
but-
in the universe. I'm yelling to the universe, but that has gone down
Yeah.
drastically.
Yeah.
What would you say is the biggest benefits you've noticed from rational emotive behavioral therapy, me applying Stoicism to our marriage?
Taking feedback is a big one, and not getting upset over the feedback that he's receiving, because I think, well, in general, you just didn't really receive feedback like that.
Even Rob, Rob will say it too.
And there's reasons for that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's healthy.
No, it wasn't super unbeneficial.
Yeah. And he gives me feedback too, and criticism as well, and that's part of marriage. Is you appreciate and love their strengths, but you can also help them improve on some of their weaknesses. So,
and I would say real quick, not to cut you off, the love feeling thing, because like, this is really good for RSD sufferers. Like when Erica and I are doing a business meeting, or we're not feeling the love like you think that, we're not like,
it's not romantic. We're talking about bills.
Yeah, like you're not looking at each other.
Overhead.
Yeah, you're not looking at each other being like, I'm so happy we're talking about this credit card bill that we're going to pay off through the business. Like you're not, you know what I mean? But on an RSD sufferer's perspective, and because of everything that happens in the way we view relationships with Sleeping Beauty and Beauty and the Beast and like all these things, you think it's going to be very perfect, but it's not, So I think I would say that's probably, one of the number one things I noticed. I would say relationships were probably the biggest thing that took effect outside of sensory motor.
You also deal with other relationships better. I mean, I can think of a handful of specific relationships in your life, which I won't name them, but that have, I would say, benefited a lot. You can tolerate, other people very close to us being very irrational and rude and self-centered, and you tolerate that a lot better.
Yeah, because what happens is, when you get to the other side, or you're like, and again, I'm just using this for the example, there is no halfway point. But when you get to the back end of the recovery process, you start to realize that you forget at times why people act the way they act. So it's really easy to get angry at someone who's maybe not understanding OCD, but we forget. The best analogy I use in the webinars is if you were born and raised in, say, Dubai, and you live in the desert, and then you go and hike Everest, on the top of Everest, although you've been born and raised in the desert, you forget what it's like to be in the desert because you're so encompassed by the cold. That's how it is when you get to the other side as well. And when you're suffering, it feels like you'll never get better because it's all encompassing. And that's a really, really important thing to cover as well, because it will seem like that in a lot of different ways. And I think that's really, really important to go over. I think that's a really good analogy because a lot of people, we get like that. We're human, we're fallible, we make mistakes. Stoicism is not easy. If Stoicism was easy, then we would all be stoic. And we're not. The 99.9 infinitum, like pi, that never ends, 3.14, blah, 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 is the amount of people that really have a difficult time applying Stoicism to their life. Because Stoicism doesn't mean I don't give a shit. It means I care, but I can understand through a rational perspective that I have no control over this situation. So I might as well let it the emotions come over me and then kind of bring us back to a normal place. So I wanted to ask you this as well. I think this is a really good question. Rob and I were discussing this, and we think you could have some really good advice. What is the advice, that you would have for friends and family from your perspective?
Is there a specific context you want me to focus on?
No, I think anything in general.
I think where I really took a turn for the positive with trying to help support you was trying to, instead of being a me versus you thing, because it was for a long time.
It was.
It's I'm on your team no matter what other people say, no matter what their opinions are. I had to make that mental switch of this is never going to work if this is me versus him. So that was like the first step, I would say, in anything productive from my standpoint. And then a lot of it was just being open-minded to being wrong about what you needed to be doing to help yourself, being wrong about what it is that you're experiencing. Or
how important is tough love and the approach from the, because there's a lot of people out there, we get some backlash on this where people say the tough love myth is there's no application for tough love. And I debate heavily against that, because I think tough love is actually more important. I think compassion.
I don't think it needs to be the first go-to for everybody. It depends on who the other person is. With Nick, he needed it because the other things were not working. So he did need tough love. But at some point, things can become enabling, and that's where the line is, I mean, for example, he wanted to sleep a lot of the time. And when he's not sleeping because his OCD and his anxiety are so bad, that initially made sense to me. But then as I started realizing that it was an avoidance behavior, letting him sleep, even if he was actually tired from not sleeping, I was enabling an avoidance behavior. So I had to start practicing tough love with him and saying, no, get out of bed, you're going to work. And it's not natural to me. Tough love is never my first go-to.
No.
Or at least it never has been. But at some point, things can become enabling, and you're not actually helping their road to recovery, and they might need tough love to get out of bed and engage with life.
And you can the thing about enabling too, and we don't really talk about enabling so much because it's the typical presentation of enabling in the way that we view it in society does not partake in the way that we think with OCD, because then people take that the wrong way and then they start freaking out. You know, people enable all the time, but I think it is important to remember we can accept people being enablers. If someone's the worst enabler on earth, we have people in our jobs, we know people that are enablers, and they're not by any sorts bad people by any means, because there's no such thing as a bad or good person. It's just a trait that probably isn't beneficial for the long run. The cool thing about empathy and compassion that I think Eric and I have talked about, I know I've studied this, is empathy is actually one of the number one reasons why human beings are actually alive, they believe. Because chimpanzees, for example, in 12 Rules of Life, Jordan Peterson's book, studies show that they'll rip their kids to pieces. There's no empathy in that. They're animalistic and they're very biologically preset to just have these instincts and they act. Where humans we use empathy and compassion and we can actually learn from that. But too much empathy and too much compassion can actually be very detrimental for the OCD sufferer.
Well, hold on. I think the misunderstanding about tough love is that tough love equals no empathy. And that's not true.
That's a good point.
That's not true. I had empathy for Nick when he was going through it, but I also understood that he's never going to get better if he doesn't continue to engage with life. I was still empathetic towards him, and maybe it didn't always feel like I was being the most empathetic person, whether it was me feeling that way or Nick. The two are not mutually exclusive. And I think the reason I had empathy while I was practicing tough love is because I didn't want you to suffer, and therefore it meant I had to practice tough love because I was being empathetic to the suffering.
And that's actually a really good point. Now, to segue into that, here's another question for you. In your opinion, how important is it accepting this is very difficult for people to hear, accepting from a friend's, family, loved one, acquaintance perspective for yourself if I never got better, if I never wanted to get better?
So this is what I tell people when I tell them that I was considering divorce is, again, acceptance doesn't equal agreement. I could accept Nick for continuing being addicted to video games, never getting better. I could accept him for that, but I didn't have to agree with that lifestyle, which meant that I could leave. So I could still have divorced him and still accepted him as a person. I just wouldn't be married to him anymore.
And real quick to segue into that, because this is important as well, because as you could see, Erica just explained very elegantly from a friend sufferer perspective, acceptance versus agreement, why it's not the same thing. And just to give you an idea, if you're watching this for the first time, society very much moves in acceptance means agreement. They move in the opposite of what we talk about. Politics is a great example. If you say something I don't agree with, I can't accept you. If you say something I do agree with, I accept you. That's not true, and it doesn't make any sense. And it's very conditional. In your opinion, how would you explain, because as OCD sufferers, and understandably so, why the immediate decision to leave was important? Like why it's important to not just act immediately. Like you weren't like one day, I'm gonna divorce Nick, and then you left. You let this sit for a while and you thought about it.
There were external factors that were playing a role in that too for me. It wasn't just like, I'm out. Because I was still I'm from Canada, I'm not from the US. I was still undergoing my green card process. It wasn't a matter of fact of, I'm just leaving and then can change my mind later.
Well, not even.
It was, if I leave, I am not coming back to this country.
But like, not even that, not even that, not even
So-
the external forces. Like, how important is it to not, for the friends and family to not make those immediate decisions like that?
Well, you have to think through it. Like, you can't just, again, this is part of what we talk about with OCD in general, with mental health in general, is not making decisions just strictly based off of emotions. But I was seeing a behavior pattern from you that was, he's not changing, he's not changing.
How long?
He says he's going to change, he's not changing. He says he's going to change, he's not changing. And so I was feeling emotions through that whole thing, but logically I'm like, okay. And that's where, when you put the video games away, that's when I was kind of like, okay, I'm not acting off of my emotions here, because he's actually showing what's the word I'm looking for?
Possibility of wanting to get better.
Yeah, there was hope.
There was hope.
You were making progress. That's the word I was looking for. So,
And explain real quick to them too, for someone who's never seen this video, just so you get an idea if you haven't seen some of our other videos. How bad was it before I met Rob? Like November 2019, mental hospital in Florida.
he couldn't get through anything. He could not get through half a day of a seminar.
Gosh, 1 hour. 1 hour.
He didn't even eat lunch. I found him out in the parking lot sobbing, saying that he didn't want to live anymore.
Oh,
And that's when I hospitalized him. So, like, he couldn't get through a few hours. He was leaving school early.
smoking vape 24/7. Oh my gosh, I must have spent $500 to $1,000 on the rigs of the jewels. They're like $24. You literally $500 to $1,000. I buy
and he
them.
was lying to me about how much he was buying. He was hiding it from me. There was a lot going on that I did not like.
I mean, I was in the mental hospital for 4 days. That was a
Right.
really bad.
And then from the mental hospital, he was calling me, screaming at me, saying, I don't know how you could think that this is going to be helpful. Because, it's a mental hospital. There are really severe mental disorders out there. And some people were talking to walls. And so he was seeing that, saying, I'm not talking to walls. I shouldn't be in here.
When there's
But
not.
he didn't want to live anymore.
And real quick, there's no shame in going to a mental
No,
hospital because a
of
lot of
course
people.
not.
But like, we just didn't know what
But
we were
you
doing.
felt shame because
At the
you're
time,
seeing these
yeah.
other people
Yeah.
who are talking to walls, and you felt shame about the fact that you were in the same environment as those people, thinking that meant that you were of the same degree or whatever.
Which, even if I was to the same degree, you could still accept that. We're just saying, like,
Right.
at the time, we didn't know
Right,
any.
you didn't know any of this.
We didn't
stuff,
know
so-
any of the stuff that we know now. I think that's a pretty good way to kind of end the video, talking about, how bad I really was. I just want to talk about one more thing that is really important from my perspective to anyone who's a friend and family member. This is to you, to the friends and family and people who are watching this who might be wanting to learn about OCD. Maybe you're trying to help someone, whether you're in the field of mental health, maybe you're just help people from our perspective, whatever it is. You cannot want the other person to get better more than them. You can't want it more than them. I've
That would
fallen.
be the other biggest piece of advice that I could
Yeah.
give is
Yeah.
I couldn't fix it for him. As much as I wanted to, I wish I could have waved my magic wand and just,
We just fall into that
But-
harder from our perspective. Like, we want you to fix it. Like, we want you because
Yeah, because it's hard.
it's a 24/7 consuming suffering process that a lot of people, even the people who work with OCD, don't quite understand. It's not that they're ignorant. You can't understand it a lot of times unless you've lived it. I always use being blind as an example. We can sympathize and think what it's like to be Stevie Wonder or Andre Bocelli and other people who are blind, the massage therapist that you know. But you'll never know what it's like to be blind. And that is unconditional life acceptance, and that's part of life. A lot of people have a hard time understanding that. And it is important to highlight that because I know what it's like to not be able to bring down rumination like most people say. I know what it's like for people to tell me just allow it to go out one ear and through the, in one ear, out the other. I know what it's like for, she's meant really well, to have someone tell us to just spit in the cup for the rest of my life. Someone we were
or
working.
just start thinking about something else.
Yeah, like, and all these other different things. And it's not an easy disorder to understand, but we don't need others to understand. So we don't actually need you to get us better. It's a bonus. It's a preference. We don't need you. We just need ourselves and what I teach people and the insights from others.
And I would say, I know that what happened with you a lot, just kind of going down that route, is he would get really upset and say, you don't understand, you don't understand. And at some point, I just looked at him and I said, would that actually make it better?
Yeah.
And it wouldn't, because it would be two of us stuck in this. And, and he didn't want that for me.
No, of course.
So, would it actually help if I understood this firsthand? And the answer is no.
And the answer is always going to be no.
Yeah.
So,
So
well, I hope you guys enjoyed that video. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, share it. Definitely share this with friends and family. It really helps when you share it and like the video, get the algorithm out there. There's not really a lot of space where a sufferer and a non-sufferer that are together, are really talking about this openly. So it is really important to talk about it. I just want to say that you don't actually need to reach, and this isn't to scare people, this is just the reality. You don't actually need to have full recovery in order to live your life. You can live your life with all symptoms present, even if you never recover.
you started living your life like within the first, not easily, but within the first week.
Yeah, 2 years ago.
You were at work.
Yeah, it was very difficult, but I was living my life. Yeah. Now, if you put the work in, use unconditional self-life, other acceptance, do exposures when necessary, time and patience, you'll more than likely reach your goal at some point, but it's not a quick fix. It's not going to happen in 6 months. It usually doesn't happen in a year. You'll make significant progress in that time, but a lot of people won't reach that robust recovery. I would say I'm not recovered from OCD or anxiety-based disorders yet, but I'm a bajillion years from where I was, and that's really important to cover. So thank you so much for watching. Really appreciate it, and have a great day.